This interview was recorded for the Boulder Artist Podcast in partnership with the Nobo Art District, whose mission is to elevate the arts in Boulder, continue the artistic and economic development in North Boulder, and support and enhance the local community. So today I'm talking with Martha Russo, who is a very unique, I would say, ceramicist and installation artist, a lecturer, and I would add a very energetic and generous lecturer at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and the coordinator for the artist collective Artnauts. She lives in the mountains just outside of Boulder, but her work has exhibited nationally at venues such as the Allen Stone Gallery in New York, the Denver Art Museum, the Santa Fe Art Institute, and the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art, as well as globally in 18 different countries. So I'm really excited to talk with you today. Thank you for being my first interviewee for this podcast, and welcome to the Boulder Artist.
Well, thank you, Becca. I feel really honored to be asked to chat about my practice, and I think it's fantastic starting this great podcast series, which I hope gets out to a lot of folks and gets them inspired to do artistic things everywhere, anywhere.
Love that. Exactly. I hope that too. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dive in.
Sure.
So you earned your Bachelor of Arts in Developmental Biology and Psychology from Princeton University. How has this background in science influenced your art?
Oh, great question. Every day, I must say that it's influenced me first in the way that scientists and sort of researchers go about their work and, having a hypothesis and then testing it and then seeing what unfolds. And a lot of the way I work in my studio is same thing. I kind of ask myself a pretty, sometimes very specific question, but more times than not a general question, and then give myself the freedom to experiment and then see what sort of floats to the surface. And then I kind of dive in more and get more involved with the discoveries that are really similar to what happens in a lab or what happens when you're on site, testing something. And then beyond the actual process, a lot of my early work, especially when I was in graduate school, was very much about thinking about what does emotion look like in the interior of your body, and especially thinking about the systems that really set off the autonomic nervous system, which is the system that is basically tells you if you are safe or not safe in a situation. And the autonomic nervous system, the way it works is it's really hooked up to your organs, especially your stomach, via muscle tissue that's around your stomach, and it activates basically squeezing your stomach or telling you, oh my gosh, this is not safe, you better get out of here. So that flight or fight mechanism is what was the basis of so much of my work, especially in grad school, that now, continues. I always think about people's nervous systems and how they can absorb my work. Is it too much? Is it too little? And I'm always trying to trigger the autonomic nervous system. And that's why, I get a lot of reviews and different sort of takes on my work. People aren't sure whether they want to stay or go, because is it beautiful or is it really, really devastatingly sad and ugly? And that's the line I'm always trying to look for.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you were also on your way to, back in your Princeton days, to potentially joining the U.S. Olympic field hockey team until a career-ending injury. I would love to hear more about your experience coming to terms with that loss, that change, and how you transitioned to focusing on art.
Oh, great question. Well, my absolute love was to run around after a ball and anything that had to do with that. And most importantly, I think, was just being on a team. I loved being on a team. And again, it's that sort of instinctual way of living when you're on a team. You don't have time to really think, oh, I got to do this or that. You have to react to the ball and react to what's going on. So playing sports it's very, very visual. And especially, I played field hockey and lacrosse, which means, you've got 11 people working together to try to get the ball over the goal line. And I think that experience to me is very similar to how I feel in the studio. And the transition, when I had my last injury, I had injured my knee when I was a sophomore, and then I rehabilitated it. I got an ACL reconstruction, and then I played another year in college, and then I was in the final tryout for the LA '84 Olympics, and I hurt it again. And the Olympic doctor and my Princeton doctor, they were like, you're just going to keep hurting it because of your anatomy structure, and we'd love to fix it again, but you're going to just hurt it again. You really should stop playing running sports. And I was like, what? So it was devastating. And basically I had to figure out something that would get me tired and something that would really take my mind off of everybody going to practice at 4:00. And so I actually took a ceramics class when I was a sophomore, because I'd done a little ceramics in high school, and I actually got kicked out because the professor who I did not know, she was this very famous woman, Toshiko Takaezu, who sort of changed the course of history of clay being an art medium. But I didn't know. I missed 2 classes in a row because with the Olympic team, at any given minute, you had to fly somewhere to play. Oh, the Germans are in, California, or I had to go to Canada to play the Canadian team. And normally you don't fly 2 weeks in a row, but the person who had played my position was hurt, so I had to go. And so when I came back to class, she basically was like, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm really sorry I missed class." And she said, "I don't care. I'm not sorry, because I filled somebody on the wait list who cares about art." And she just totally kicked me out. And I was like, wow, I thought college, you just kind of go when you can to class, right? But anyway, so now 2 years later, and I am coming back. I had to take a full year off at Princeton, and I got hurt the first part of the year, and I was like, I have to fill some time here. And my family's Italian, and I was working at this Italian restaurant in New Haven after I got my knee fixed again, and they were really great, these 2 guys. They said, you kind of look sad all the time, Martha. What's going on? And I told them about my knee, and they were so great. They said, the only way you'll feel better is if you go back to the mother country. And so long story short, they convinced me. They said, you should go to Italy and go where your family is from, and you'll start feeling better. And so I did. I went to Florence for the semester. I studied language in the morning, and I apprenticed for artists in the afternoon. And I thought, oh, this is so much fun. Had a blast. And they were right. I started feeling better. But then I had to go back to Princeton, and I knew it was going to be like, oh, everybody's going to practice, and I'm not. So I went and I begged with this Toshiko Takaezu. I begged her to come back to class, and she could not believe I had such a nerve to come back and ask. And she said to me that she's like, I can't give another space away. You'll get better, and you'll take your sports sticks out of the closet, and I'll never see you again. And I said, no, I cannot play. I'll bring you a doctor's note. And she was so kind of incredulous that I came, that she said, okay, I'm going to give you 2 weeks, and I'm going to see what you can make in 2 weeks, and I'll come back and we'll talk on a Saturday at 9 a.m. And I made all this stuff like crazy, right? And I thought, this lady is so crazy. She is going to think I'm like, I'm going to be a kiln hog in class, because they only had 1 kiln. And when you stack a kiln, in the front part of the kiln, there's a little space that you leave so there's air circulation. There are no shelves. And I thought, if she starts getting on me, I made these pieces that just fit in the front of the kiln. And I made them so they weren't that big, so it wouldn't disrupt the airflow of the kiln. So anyway, she comes back. I put everything out. She barely says hi to me. I'm like, oh, this is not going to go well. She's walking around with her hands on her hips. She's picking up stuff. She doesn't say a word for at least 20, 25 minutes, nothing. And then she says, okay, I don't think I like you. Okay. And I said, what? What did I do? And she said, you are such a show off. And I said, I don't understand. She goes, look at all this work you made. You are a show off. And I said, listen, lady. And I was really getting mad. And I said, word for word, you said, I'll give you 2 weeks and I want to see what you can make. And I said, this is it. This is what I made in 2 weeks. And I was there every day throwing things. And then she said, do you realize we only have one kiln? And she goes, if I let you in class, no one will ever be able to fire anything. And I said, I don't want anything fired. I need a place to go at 4:00 every day when my friends are going to practice. And she's like, I don't. And I said, and I thought of this, and I showed her the pieces that fit in the front of the kiln. And she just looked at me, and she's looking at the work. And then I'll never forget, she said, oh, she's like closes her eyes and she goes, oh, I have no choice. You're in class. And honestly, that day saved my life, honestly, because I just don't know what I would have done. And I just like dove in. And studying biology and psychology, I really, like my whole family's in the medical field. And I thought I'd be a doctor or some kind of child psychologist. I love kids, and I thought I'd work with kids. And then when I got done with school, I wanted to work at a high school to see what age kids I wanted to work with. And I helped their ceramics teacher because he had MS. And I sort of helped Leighton Bridge. He was the greatest guy. And he taught me tons of stuff because I'd only taken ceramics for like a year and a half. And I was slowly getting addicted. And I was like, ooh, I love this. So back to your question. I know that was kind of a roundabout way of getting there. But the bottom line is I like the physicality of it. And I also like the science behind it because I love the periodic table, and I love cells and cellular biology, and just like the makeup of things on a microscopic level makes really perfect sense to me. And ceramics had all of that, like clay bodies are different structures, and a porcelain is super smooth. So when you see it magnified, it's like plates and they slide one on top of the other. Whereas like a hand building clay is it's almost like a bunch of needles, and they're all sort of in different directions. And that's why it stands up. And so I love that kind of internal logic of how clay worked. And then I'm like totally addicted to the kiln. I'm a total pyro. And I also know that with the chemicals that you use to make a glaze, it's infinite. And that infinite kind of idea to me and freedom, that's why I just people are like, well, do you ever get, you don't know what to do? I'm like, oh no, I never have a time, because one thing just leads to another, And I do think, and I still love that part, that the art that I make, because it is really labor intensive and it's pretty large, it keeps getting larger and larger scale, I have to stay in really good shape. And if I don't do Pilates and yoga, I do that every other day. And then I'm swimming. I don't do any running sports. I haven't run literally since 84. But I run, I swim, and I hike and I bike, because if my back's not strong, I'm gonna hurt myself. And I want to make sure I have fun. And as I get older now, as we'll probably talk about when we talk about more questions, I mean, I just need more and more people to help me. So the team is a different kind of team, but it continues to grow and be very, very alive right now. So.
What great stories. Incredible stories. And actually, you already answered my next question.
Okay.
I was going to ask you about, let me make sure I don't butcher this, Toshiko Takaezu.
Oh, good job. Yeah.
Oh, but wow, that is
and
too funny.
I have to say, we became lifelong friends. She really taught me how to work. Like, the thing that was interesting with her is, we didn't really talk about aesthetics that much. It was more her assignments in college. They were super simple, and it was kind of Karate Kiddish, I have to say. Like, it was just, you need to show up and be ready, and you need to be responsible for yourself. She was super direct, and it really upset a lot of people, but I kind of loved it. Like she was just like my Olympic coaches. She was harder than my Olympic coaches, though, I have to say. Like, it was sort of brutal. She'd come breezing through and she goes, who's making this? And you think, oh, wow, she's saying something to me. And then the next sentence, she goes, if you're going to make it so big, don't make it so ugly, And then she'd just leave and you'd be like, whoa, she just mow you over. And, you could never do that in class today. You get called down to the dean's office. But I was her assistant. I had class with her for a year and a half, and then I taught at a high school for 3 years in Boston. And then I went back to Princeton because they asked me to coach. And I called her up and I said, can I be one of your assistants so I could use the studio? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. And then but the biggest education I had with her was being her apprentice. And I lived with her for a summer. And she was single her whole life. Her work was huge and heavy, and so she always had a live-in apprentice, again, like kind of old Japanese style. And she's Japanese-American. She grew up in Hawaii. But that's the summer I was like, oh, my God, this woman gets the most out of one day and one night that I've ever seen in my life. And the amount of work and the focus and detail of her work is pretty phenomenal. And I'll tell you one more little story that kind of seals it for me. It was the last firing we were going to do together. And she had a massive gas kiln, and she lived in New Jersey in Quakertown, this little town. And we stuffed the kiln, because I made my work all summer long. She's making work, getting ready for this big show of 5 decades of her work. And so we put too much work in, so the airflow was a little tight. And that meant it was a very slow firing. And it was like, I don't know, it was around 12 o'clock at night, and we'd been firing all day. And she said, you should go to bed. I'll stay up and finish the kiln. And it was going to be another couple hours. And I'm like, no way, I'm not going to bed. Like, what am I going to do? This is our last kiln together. I'm staying up. And she's like, okay. She used to call me stubborn girl, which makes me laugh because she was the most stubborn thing on the planet. And then, so we were she was like, what do you want to do? And I said, hey, Toshiko, I have a couple field hockey sticks in my back of my car that I just like stick work and passing. And I said, you want me to teach you a little field hockey? And she's like, oh, yeah, I want to learn. I want to see what this is all about. And she had this little concrete pad right outside of her studio. So I showed her a little dribbling, a little stick work. And she's like, well, now let's go on the run. And I was like, it's dark. And she had a gravel sort of driveway with plants. And I said, where do you want to go? I can't really run that fast. She's like, oh, you can keep up with the old lady. She was about 70 at that point. So we started dribbling and passing on her really rocky driveway. And then we went out in the street and, there were lights and, oh my God, we were sweating like crazy because it's this, New Jersey humidity. And we literally, we got so into it. She's like, oh my God, the kiln. So we run back, we check the kiln, and sure enough, the cones are starting to go down. That's how you tell the temperature. And we were okay. But now we had to just really sit there. And so this was so Toshiko. She was so hard on you, but she always would give you, a little bit when you deserved it. And so she took me by the wrist and she said, I have to apologize to you. And I said, what? What are you talking about? And she said, I was so terrible to you, calling you sports girl and saying you'd take the sticks out of the closet. And remember, she goes, remember when I said you cannot play sports your whole life, but you can make art your whole life, and you should really think about that? That was the last thing she said to me when she kicked me out. And I said, oh, listen, I clearly remember, but, thank God you let me into class. You're saving my life here. And she said, I can understand why your heart was so broken. And she said, this is so much fun. And then she goes, and it's just us two. I can't imagine what you feel like when you're playing with your teammates. And I said, that's the thing that really broke my heart. And she said, okay, I still want to learn that backhand move, and she goes right into, and then we started practicing a little more and the cones went down. But that was just one of those nights where you kind of go, wow, did that really happen? And really that's she just had this incredible driven, and then she'd back up and go, this is what's important about life. So we had the most, she met my kids and my husband, and now my brother Peter has a massive collection of her work and has been championing her work to now she's being looked at one of the premier abstract expressionists in the sculpture. And there are a number of big shows opening this year of her work. She passed away 12 years ago. It's coming up, but her time, I mean, she was very famous before she died, but this is the biggest deal going. So, yeah. So I don't know where I'd be without her sort of meanness and kindness. Yeah.
And I feel like that kindness means even more when it's rare like that.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, I know this took a lot to come out.
Oh, yeah. It was really great. So, anyway.
Okay, so I believe you've also experienced a more recent injury that inspired your piece called Chute, which is now on display at the Galleries of Contemporary Art at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. How did or does this injury feel different or similar to your injuries in college?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. Well, this particular episode was in about 2015, and my right shoulder it just froze up. And it was irritated and upset. And then all of a sudden, I'm not moving my arm very well. And I'm like, oh, my God, what is going on? And I was really, really pushing it and working hard to get ready for a show at Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art. And it was a 25-year kind of retrospective of my work. And I got really nervous because I had that feeling like, oh, my God, what would I do if I couldn't make my work? And, of course, you have a million great art role models when they have, like Chuck Close, when he was losing his faculties and facilities for looking and moving, he just changed his work. And, Frida Kahlo, of course, from bed. And so I had these images and I said, well, my left arm's okay. I can just, but you really kind of need both when you're doing what I'm doing. So it really just got me thinking about wow, I gotta take it easy a little bit more. And two, I'm kind of, getting older. I'm wearing myself out. It means I need more help. But with my work, it's so much about reacting to what happens. It's kind of tough to be like, oh, make this crazy thing that looks like this. So long story short, I thought, well, what does this look like? And I always feel like when I go to when I have some injury or have to go to the doctors, I have to say it's a lot of research for me. And in some weird way, I think it's completely interesting. So when I got my MRI and I see my shoulder doctor, he puts up the images and he starts explaining it. And my mind is just like, oh, that would be so cool to make everything that got nicked, and he described it, and I listened really careful because I like how words sort of trigger images for me. And he said, look, the good news is no surgery, there's nothing major, but the bad news is, what are you doing to your shoulder to make it look like this? And he went through and he pointed out, he's like, look, you have all these nicks on your muscles. Are you lifting stuff that's too heavy? And I'd be like, I said, well, let's go to my website and I'll show you what I do. And we had this amazing conversation. And I said, well, this might be where I'm lifting things too much. And this might be, the other big thing was, it seems like you're doing a lot of repetitive tasks. And I said, oh, let's look at my Nomo series where there's 30,000 pieces that make up these forms. And he was just like rolling his eyes and going, okay, you have nicked all your muscles, your tendons and your ligaments are completely angry with you in a big bunch in a tangle, and you have pitted your that like little rotator, the little cup around your joint. And he's like, you have got to take it easy, and you're going to PT, and here you go, and take these anti-inflammatories. And I was just so happy I didn't have to get surgery. I said, okay, I'll do whatever you said. And he also said, your shoulder's way forward. And I said, that's from a long time ago, lifting my very heavy son, who is very much a mama's boy, the sweetest guy on the planet. And he said, you should go to a chiropractor and try to get that shoulder back and your spine straightened out. So that, in combination with seeing this amazing sports chiropractor, Dave Boynton, who explained that, he said, yeah, you're really twisted at the top and we got to flatten you out and do this. And then he explained, and it was such a great moment. I was like, oh, I'm going to go make that. He said, when you're young, your spine is like soft sponges all stacked on top of each other. And they're very pliable. They react. If you get a little out of whack, they're going to go back on their own. But then when you get older, the sponges get drier and they start to misalign, and then you start compensating. And he goes, you are getting into the dry sponge stage of your life. And I was like, shoot. And then I was like, oh, shoot. Okay. And I said to him, it's like I'm going down the chute. And he said to me, but you're not there yet. You're not falling off. And I said, oh, that's it. And so then the first thing I did was I went home and I did anatomically, my version of what the shoulder looked like. And then I looked at the images of the MRI and made certain pitted places. And then I was on this hike and all the pine needles, there were so many pine needles, and I thought those looked just like muscle tissue. So I got a bunch of those, went back to the studio, made all these different parts that look like different connections with pine needles and different clumps of porcelain clay, dipped those in porcelain slip because I knew they wouldn't all stay intact and they'd look frayed, right? And then that idea of like, damn, I'm going down the chute inspired how all these pieces would be shown. And I tend to do that. Like I tend to just run with the idea for a while. And while I'm making these components, be like, oh, what does that look like? What will it look like? So the piece in the show, it's definitely one of my favorite pieces because it's super raw. It's definitely a little macabre, and people are like, oh, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And I'm like, it's a thing. It's happening to all of us, like it or not. We are changing and we're getting a little more crusty.